So, so let's take just a few minutes. I once did this talk in 10 minutes. I know I can do it. Let's just reclaim two really fundamental wisdom teachings from two traditions, starting with Christianity. So I fell in love with Christ much later because I didn't know from Christ. Like Rami, I grew up with a suspicion of Jesus. Like that word provoked, either peril, some kind of cellular memory of, we're in danger, or else just like eye rolling, But then through Sufism, actually through my love of Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, the great 12th, 13th century Sufi poet, I fell in love with San Juan de la Cruz, St. John of the Cross. The poetry of John of the Cross sounds so much like Rumi. Have you read John of the Cross? Have you read Rumi? Yeah? And that I was like, oh my God, there's something to this. And through falling in love with the poetry of John of the Cross as a 20-year-old living in Spain, studying Spanish literature, opened up the Christian mystics to me, and that's what enabled me to fall in love with Christ. So I thank Rumi. And so what I want to do is look at the teaching from Christianity that has most affected me, and that is the teaching of The Dark Night of the Soul by John of the Cross. The first book that I wrote, was a translation of Dark Night of the Soul, that I wrote because I couldn't find a good translation that I liked. I couldn't find an accessible translation that didn't leave people like me, a Jewish woman with a Sufi practice, a Hindu guru, Buddhist meditation, and pagan inclinations, out in the cold. So I wanted to write a translation that my agnostic Jewish mother, for instance, could relate to. So I translated Dark Night of the Soul because it was so deeply important to me. And in The Dark Night of the Soul, John of the Cross distinguishes this experience of radical emptiness, what he calls la nada. So Rami spoke this morning in his Gospel of Sophia. The second one was nothing, the nothingness. This is San Juan de la Cruz. It's radical non-dualism. And it has two parts, this experience of the dark night of the soul that descends upon the mature practitioner or seeker. The first part is the night of sense, and the second part is the night of spirit. In the night of sense, John says, we're like going along our spiritual business happily. We're chanting Shrima Jema, or sitting in meditation, or serving soup to the hungry, and we've been feeling this sense of the abundance of the sacred filling our hearts. Like these spiritual practices that reliably ended up giving us a felt sense of connectedness to the divine. You know that feeling. And when the dark night of the soul first comes or begins to descend, those feelings start drying up. And what used to guarantee a sense of the felt connectedness of the beloved just don't work anymore. In fact, you're singing hymns in church, your favorite hymns start to sound like a commercial jingle for Frosted Flakes. It doesn't do it anymore. So that's the night of sense, and that, he says, happens to everyone at some point on the spiritual path. Can you admit that has happened to you, that your spiritual life has dried up in periods? And he says it can really freak you out because it can feel like you're doing something wrong, or that God has abandoned you, probably because you've done something wrong. Like it just feels wrong. Nothing's working anymore. Nothing feels full and connected. If you can stay with that experience of aridity, that desert spiritual experience, and not run away, then you might graduate to the deeper space of the adept, he calls it, the night of spirit, which is when all the conceptual constructs that you've relied upon to make sense of your spiritual life, of God, of ultimate reality, just crumble. They don't hold you up anymore. The scaffolding comes tumbling down. And all of your cherished belief systems go with it, or go up in flames. Has anyone experienced that? John says that this isn't necessarily something related to any external circumstances, by the way, like a great loss or a serious health diagnosis or something like that. In fact, he says it's usually private and invisible. How am I doing, Randy, with timing? We're good. Okay. You're not bringing in the hook right now. Okay. And so, but here's the thing that I noticed in my own dark nights, but one in particular. By the way, this is both the good news and the bad news. Usually there are multiple dark nights of our souls in our lives. It's like, oh, good, got that over with. Another one's coming. Deeper levels of surrender, of wild surrender, are required of us along the path. Okay, here's the story. Many of you probably know this. So when I translated Dark Night of the Soul, which was, I remember this feeling of, this book is so beautiful, and this translation came pouring through. Like, I feel like it was all lined up. I could die now. It's like my life is done. It's complete. It was the first of, I think Barbara told me 16 books. I don't know how many books, but a lot of books. But I thought it was like my last book. It just felt like that, that it was just complete. My life was complete. But when when the book came out, when I actually received my first advance copy, the real book, hard copy, delivered by FedEx, my 14-year-old daughter Jenny was killed in a car accident that very day. FedEx came rumbling down the dirt road, delivered the package. Jenny had disappeared the night before in my car and hadn't returned. And the police came to the door half an hour after the package came to the door to inform me that she had been found and she was gone. I had just spent a lot of time trying to tell people that a dark night of the soul had nothing to do with external circumstances. Bullshit. I am here to say that experience stripped me in exactly all the ways that John of the Cross writes about. My sense of felt connectedness to the beloved, gone. All my conceptual constructs, all my belief systems, everything I thought I knew about the universe and God and me, gone. John of the Cross, my beloved San Juan de la Cruz, is a dude. He was all about getting up and out of this world. He was all about purification and perfection. He was about climbing what he called the secret ladder out of here. That this world of human experience is an illusion to be transcended as quietly, with as much dignity as possible. Whereas my experience had always been, but especially in the wake of my daughter's death, was a mess. And it very much involved my bodily awareness and experience. My mother heart was torn asunder, and that grief and anguish infiltrated every fiber of my being. Nothing was left out. So my dark night of the soul experience was all about my experience of being a human being. And by reclaiming my humanity within this dark night of the soul, I was able to experience the grace, even in the horror. Like I knew just enough to not check out of my experience or spiritually bypass. I love that expression, spiritual bypassing, to not use spiritual practices and beliefs to get away, but to fully be present for what was happening to me. Not to flex my spiritual muscles and prove that I could be present, that I could sit in this fire of agony, but as an act of love and devotion. So it wasn't mindfulness practice. I'm going to sit here and be aware of this unbearable pain to show that I can be mindful and be present. No, fuck that. I was showing up, allowing and surrendering as an act of love, of devotion, actually to my daughter. Jenny, I'm not going to turn away from this, because to turn away from this is to turn away from you. I'm going to stay present with you and allow whatever happens to happen. It's none of my business. This shattering, whether I get remade, I don't care. I'm just going to sit in this fire and love you. That's wild surrender. And yes, John of the Cross taught me how to do that, and Rumi taught me how to do that, and a lot of great dead men taught me how to do that. But God lives among the pots and pans, as Owen reminded us last night via Santa Teresa de Avila. Not outside of the kitchen, not away from our broken hearts and our serious health diagnoses and our lovers leaving us and certain people getting elected to certain positions of public office and doing tremendous damage from which it looks like we may never recover. All of these things are where the Holy One dwells. So the dark night of the soul isn't about getting beyond the senses and the intellect. It's about surrendering to things as they are and allowing those broken places to break us open to the inflowing of the holy. I wonder what I said in my notes. Let's see. This teaching is inviting us into a state of radical surrender, boundless mystery, and utter unknowing. That's really what the dark night of the soul is about. It's not about going through a hard time necessarily, though a hard time can be the occasion for a transformational experience that we could call a dark night of the soul. But it's about being stripped of all our opinions on the matter, of being plunged into radical not knowingness and resting there. Not enduring it, but taking refuge in the mystery. This is a supremely feminine state of being. The dark feminine, the mystery. It's a naked state. And this is what I want to leave you with for this part. The dark night of the soul strips us of what John calls our sensory and intellectual attachments. When we experience a dark night of the soul, we're emptied. That's that state of kenosis. We're made empty. And when we are stripped of everything that stands between us and a naked encounter with the beloved, we can have an intimate naked encounter with the beloved. That our sensory attachments, the way we think it's supposed to feel to have a spiritual experience, or the ideas that we have about ultimate reality, when those are taken from us, either through the private, invisible to everybody else experience of spiritual maturity that John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul, or through a harrowing experience of the human condition, when we are stripped of all of our ideas and customary ways of connecting with the sacred, we are naked and we can make love with love itself. We can have an intimate, direct encounter with the great mystery that is love. Only when we're emptied, only when we're made naked. And that is a passionate, personal, embodied experience. Or it can be. And it comes and goes, and it's everybody's birthright, by the way. This is not a rarefied state reserved for the spiritual elite. A mystical experience is simply, at least in the technical definition, a direct experience of the divine. Direct, unmediated through any authority figures or prescribed practices or anything like that. It's a direct experience of the sacred. And we can't have one when all that other stuff is in the way. Our ideas about what a spiritual experience is supposed to be, for instance, and what it isn't allowed to be. Like, for those of us who are progressive interspiritual types, those evangelicals are like deluded. We couldn't possibly find God there. I remember going to a Pentecostal church and going, oh my God, this feels like a Hindu hippie temple in Taos, New Mexico. The same alive, passionate, longing, yearning, a feeling being embodied by the divine. So my idea that, someone who thinks gay people are going to all go to hell means that they can't be my brother or sister. I'm cutting myself. Yes, okay, our politics are probably different. But our hearts are the same when they cry out for God.